The AAOS Bone Beat Orthopedic Podcast channel is pleased to welcome you to the latest episode of the AAOS Now podcast. This monthly podcast series covers a broad range of topics to help orthopedic surgeons stay informed, enhance their practices, and provide the best possible care for their patients.
Hello, I'm Dr. Richard Schaefer of the AAOS Now editorial board. I'm here with Dr. William Levine. He's the Frank E. Stitchfield Professor and Chair of the Department of Orthopaedic Surgery at Columbia University, and Dr. Amiethab Aiyer, who's the Chief of Division of Foot and Ankle Surgery at Johns Hopkins, and also known to the many medical students who look for him as advice by his Instagram handle, Ortho Mentor. We're talking today about the match process. Bill Tabbs, thanks for being here.
Great to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Tabbs, if you wouldn't mind starting us off for our members who may have done their residencies in the past and may not be as familiar with the current match process, and maybe some of the younger students that aren't familiar, just to explain what the match process is.
Yeah, the match process is the process by which students who are going through medical school are basically getting selected for residency, for lack of a better term. And, once upon a time, it used to be, hey, there was a handshake, there was a conversation, and like you said yes or no, if they made an offer after an interview, and that was it. But there was a lot of challenges with that, such that it wasn't equitable, to be honest. And as a result, the match process, which I also believe, if I'm not mistaken, won some major awards in its discovery and delineation, has been used to help.
Nobel Prize for the two guys who designed it. That prize.
That prize.
A big deal.
Yeah. And in doing so, it's provided students an opportunity to try to get to the best program for them of the ones that they have interviewed at. So after you interview, you make a rank list. Programs do the same thing. They are certified by each program within the National Residency Match Program, and then subsequently the algorithm works to spit out a match. The first process is, did you match? And then a few days later on match day, people find out where they match specifically.
Well, great, thanks. Now, Bill and Tabbs, both of you teach residents, teach medical students, so you have an interest in the match. But really, I know you both have a specific interest in mentoring students through that match process. And so, Bill, why are you so passionate about this, teaching students and mentoring students?
Well, thanks for the question, and thanks for having me and Tabbs. I think it goes back to Case Western when I was a medical student, and I always go back to the beginning. And there was a guy named Peter Scholes, who's a pediatric orthopedic surgeon, great guy, later became the head of the USMLE in Philadelphia and done some really cool stuff. But what was interesting about Peter was he really didn't have any leadership roles as far as residency education, medical student education, but it was a passion of his. So if you were a Case Western student interested in orthopedics, you kind of knew you had to find Peter Scholes. You kind of knew you had to start to do research with him or do something with him when you were a first or second year med student. And he made almost a contract with you that if you did your part of the deal, he would do his part, which his goal was to try to get every Case medical student to match in ortho. And I had no clue what my future would look like, but I kind of always thought if I ever had that opportunity to pay forward what Peter Scholes did for me, I would love to do for students in the future. And I've spent the last nearly 3 decades doing just that.
Well, that's great. That's quite a tribute to him too.
It really is. But it's also, as we talk about mentorship, which is obviously our passion mutually, it's a tribute to all my mentors. There's so many from so many parts of my career, and so he gets the nod as the start, but then there's residency mentors and fellowship mentors. And I talk to students all the time. The beautiful thing about mentorship is that you don't have to have a mentor who's only in your institution. I have so many people that I consider mentors, now friends, who were from other institutions. They had no reason to actually take me under their wing when I was thinking about becoming a chair, for example, and reaching out to Joe Zuckerman or Richard Gelberman, Jim Beatty, all these giants in the field. And they were so giving of their time for one reason, and probably one reason only. I was curious, and I asked questions, and I wasn't obnoxious, I hope. And so they paid that back in kind, and then that led to, eventually my becoming a chair, et cetera. So it's an interesting journey, and I think what you need to really appreciate that mentorship is not just defined as I have to have one mentor. If Amiethab Aiyer is not the perfect mentor for me, which is not true for anybody, but then all is lost. No, not at all. Find different mentors from different specialties or different areas, different institutions, who might be able to help provide you some guidance.
I'll just chime in with, I agree with everything that was said, and we are sort of the product, we think of being the products of our family and the experiences and, how they raise us and nurture us, and mentorship historically is a very generationally familial thing. As we think about where we are, and Bill just sort of alluded to this, we're the products of who we sort of leaned on over the years, and the knowledge they instilled in us, and the experiences, the good, the bad, and the not so great, all of which help to define who we are today, right? And so that is why, as you go through these meetings, I know this happens to Bill routinely, every few steps you see a student, a former resident, a former fellow, that you've impacted their lives, and then you see people yourselves who have impacted you. And I think that that's a really critical thing, because as we think about, hey, the singularity of a mentor, it's not really the case. You should be building out this board for yourself of people who can really help you, help guide you and support you, elevate you at different parts of your life and your life journey, whether it be professionally or personally as well.
Yeah. It's a two-way street too, do you think?
Well, it's a critical part, and we yesterday we had the honor of being at the Academy's Medical Student Symposium, which is unbelievable. 450 students. 6 years ago, there were 50 students. So pretty remarkable. But I talk about that a lot. Tabs and I talk about this in great detail, that mentorship is this bi-directional partnership. And the biggest mistake that students make is coming into the mentor with their hands open and saying, I am here to be your mentee. What will you do for me? That's going to fail 100%. So it's, what do I as the mentee bring to the relationship? And you want to instill in the mentor that they want to be your mentor. And you do that by having a relationship. You do that by saying, I really see something in this person that I would love to help get to the next level, because I think they have this potential. And I think that's an important, really huge component of the mentor-mentee relationship. And the evolution of the cycle is that you then become colleagues, and in the best of circumstances, you actually become lifelong friends. Doesn't happen with all of them, of course, but that's kind of the life cycle of the mentor-mentee relationship. And then the last part that I always remind students is, it's perfectly okay to divorce a mentor. It might not be the right match, and have an amicable divorce without too much contention, and that's okay. And identify those early and jettison them, and then find mentors that might be a better fit for you.
And I think that speaks to this notion of, you've got to start reaching out. You've got to use meetings like this to establish connections, stop people and say hello. If you saw them present on something that was of interest to you, those conversations, however daunting as they may be to have, that is how you start establishing or planting these seeds. Whether they truly blossom or not is a different story, but nurturing them with time and reciprocal sort of understanding and reciprocal investment is so important. And if you want it to last, to Bill's point, if you want it to last over time and endure into that point where it becomes a friendship, it really does involve both folks investing that time, energy, and effort, because you both care about each other, right? So what may start as this sort of, expert or mentor-mentee relationship early, or evolve into that, initially serves as, hey, someone's trying to provide information, someone's trying to learn that. Over time, as people learn, the paths, things may change, tables may turn, and that's hopefully what occurs, but it doesn't always. And you need to be able to recognize, hey, this is not working for me at this point in time, and know that it's okay that that's not the case, which is why this board that I always speak to is so important. So you never have to feel that, hey, I don't have the person I used to rely upon. Where else can I turn to if I don't have that individual? There are so many people around you. It's not just about people who are senior to you. It's about people all around you, your peers, even family members for that matter, right? Family members are probably the quintessential sort of mentors, technically speaking, and that's how we've always interpreted. But in our world specifically, it's not always so easy to look at family members. We don't all have an orthopedic surgery, parent, as it were, or surgeon parent. So really think about those individuals and curate what you feel is aligned with your values. And the more you can define that clearly, the easier it is to find those who truly will be those mentors that evolve into friends.
Right. Now, Bill and Tabs, you both have a working relationship in this area of mentoring medical students, advising medical students. This forum, for example, other presentations, webinars. I don't know if it's exactly Simon and Garfunkel or Rockwood and Green. The students wouldn't get those references anyways. But how did the two of you develop a relationship in this area?
Do I get to tell the story?
You get to tell the story. That's right.
All right. So I'm minding my own business, and email comes into my inbox about, it's 2026, so 6 years ago. And it's this guy named Amiethab Aiyer, University of Miami. No idea who he is. And he says, hey, my buddies Matt Varicalo and John Kaplan and I have developed this thing called Ortho Mentor. And it's kind of filling this void that's out there. And we were wondering if we could talk to you. And I've jokingly said it's because they were all so young, they needed somebody with gray hair. And I had kind of developed this reputation and this forum, if you will, where medical students from around the country would send me their CVs and ask me to comment. And I just did that willingly and did it as much as I possibly could. It's hard to scale that, of course. And so Tabs sends me this email, and I was like, wow, this is filling this void. And what we both noticed is that while some of us in this world are extraordinarily passionate and available to do this kind of work, because you do have to be available, there's this huge void and huge paucity. There's these medical students who have zero mentorship, and they're just flying. It's like flying a plane at night with no instruments. And so I thought, that's really cool. So I reached back out to him and said, yeah, let's talk. And we talked. And then it just became this incredible symbiotic relationship where we did a webinar together with Matt and John originally. And then we started to incorporate program directors and other like-minded people around the country, trying to think about geographic diversity and other issues. And it grew and blossomed. And one of the amazing things was COVID hit. And so we had developed this reputation, and one of the first webinars we did during COVID blew up Zoom. We had 5,000 people and it had to go to YouTube Live, and so it's just been an incredible, but we had never met in person until, and I was supposed to see him at University of Miami, and then that got turned to virtual, and then I got invited to Johns Hopkins, and that's the first time we actually met in person, which was amazing.
To clarify, it was 2 emails before he responded. We're being candid. But I remember that conversation driving to the OR. It was around 6 a.m. or something like that. And we talked, and I shared this concept of what we had been developing at the time. And I remember, and I always refer to him as Dr. Levine for years. And Dr. Levine is like ecstatic on the phone. I could just sense his excitement. And I'm like, there's something here to this. Because similarly, at least at Miami, I was getting this reputation of I'm the person to go to if you have an interest in orthopedics. And I knew even from my experience before, going through OrthoGate and other sort of forums, Dr. Levine would be on there responding to messages like, I've got 25 JBJS publications and a 260, am I going to match? And he's providing a very robust response, and I was always so impressed by that, which is what really had stayed in my head all those years later. And I was like, he's the person to reach out to because I know he has a passion for this.
Well, Rich, let me just interrupt, because the OrthoGate's interesting to talk about, because that was our first kind of experience with online social media. And I didn't know what the word troll was back then, but I sure do now. And these folks, there was so much trolling going on that I got in touch with Christian Vallette, one of the developers of OrthoGate. And I said, Christian, can you create an Ask the Attending section for your website, because there's so much BS here and these students are freaking out because people are doing this trolling stuff. Didn't know what it meant then. Yeah. And he said, sure. And so we started to do this Ask the Attending site, and there were other people involved, but as it turned out, I was the only attending that was responding. And so that happened for a while, and that was the precursor to our relationship.
Yeah, and I think this was obviously all as it was evolving, as we were developing various things, and to say, hey, we started thinking about other ways we could engage the platform with, the academy and just get the word out. So we were able to curate things like we did a textbook with the academy, which was like the first of its type. And the webinars have continued to sort of roll on. And while we're excited that, hey, we did have that peak of, like 5,000, it still now serves a very useful purpose, particularly in light of the fact that things have changed so much just in the last 5 years since COVID. 6 years since COVID, things have dramatically shifted in terms of just the application process. So if you're not up to date with this, and you are, and we know that schools have varying degrees of, there's a lot of heterogeneity in the advising and how like current folks are, that means that, hey, like where do you turn to? And that is literally why we've continued to do what we've done to date. And I still remember like Bill's gotten to talk to my wife. He knows the kids. Like we've hung out at like he came down for a Ravens game. We went with his like family, and it's really just been so. And I consider myself like genuinely very lucky, because what brought us together was this sort of mutual relationship and interest, mutual relationship with mentorship. It's now allowed us to sort of forge this pretty deep friendship that we continue to this day.
Tabs mentioned something there, and I think it deserves a little bit more discussion. It's a kind of a controversial topic, Richard, and that is, if you're a student at a school in a department and you have a faculty person who is offering their advice and their mentorship, if they are not on top of it and they don't have their finger on the pulse, and students don't always know this, that can be a really difficult road to navigate. And so we try to give advice to students that it's okay, don't discount their advice perhaps, but the best advice, honestly, and the best people to contact are either people like Tabs, who do have their finger on the pulse for sure, but the medical students from your school who have just gone through the interview process and just matched and are just about to start internship. That class is a really important group of people to tap into, because they've just gone through it. And even students from your school who are PG 4s or 5s, the process has changed since they did this. As Tab said, it is incredibly fast, signaling how many away programs you're doing. All of this stuff is extremely fluid. And so for students who have mentors, that's great, but just make sure, again, branch out, make sure you've got somebody who really knows the ins and outs of programs, because you might be getting advice from someone who's really genuine, but telling you what the reputation was from 15 years ago. And the entire faculty's changed and the entire culture has changed, but they don't really know that.
I think that brings up a perfect point. There are still schools out there, especially now that there's more schools without home programs, so they don't necessarily have that direct information.
You mean they don't have a residency program?
Correct, exactly right. And while that's sort of its own challenge, and this is where resources like this, amongst others, become so valuable in terms of being current with what's going on. But we've even seen there's students who are still being asked to apply to 100 programs when the signaling data, demonstrates, hey, really, you need to stick to those 30 that participate in signaling and whatever other number that do not, which is still, kind of increasing. That's like getting smaller and smaller. So I think that is there's still that misinformation and still a lot of anxiety surrounding it. So students still continue to apply to more and more, as a perfect example, despite the data being sort of demonstrative of, hey, you don't need to do that, nor should you, and keep your money for something else.
The good news is, though, that with signaling for sure, I think they're getting the message loudly and clearly. The data is so overwhelmingly against applying to more than 30 programs that we're seeing that, maybe somebody applies to 35 because those are 5 programs that didn't participate in the signaling process or whatever, but you don't see people applying to 70 and 80 and 90 programs. It's an absolute waste of money.
It may be, Tabs, if you wouldn't mind, for our members, some who may be well-meaning, but when they applied 15, 20, 30 years, and what is signaling, and how does that...
Yes, signaling, it's a great question, and it's something that's developed in the last it's been around for a little while, but implemented in orthopedics, and this is now the 3rd cycle, if I'm not mistaken. So signaling was a way for students to have more control over indicating to a program that they were interested in that. And in prior years, and so going back a ways, you might have a faculty member reach out. So that was like an unofficial signal, right? Hey, it's so-and-so, I'm reaching out to Bill about like a student who's interested in Columbia. That was a way for me to signal on behalf of that student. But there wasn't a focused way of doing that. And basically you couple that to people applying to a zillion programs, which is what they used to do, over 100 plus programs that they would submit. And it's like, it gets out of hand. It gets out of hand for the students. It's a financially stressful. On the program side, you have thousands of applications you're having to sift through. And now on the heels of many institutions going to pass-fail completely for grades, step one going to pass-fail as well, signaling has now allowed inadvertently an application cap. And so effectively, places are more often than not interviewing people or students who do not signal them, indicating, hey, I'm really interested in your program. Now, an away rotation, and that's another sort of controversy, how many should you be doing? But an away rotation is a signal. You're indicating to that program, if I spend time at Columbia, it means I must like Columbia in some way, shape, or form. If I add the signal on top of that, that's weighting that sort of, the signal's being weighted in some capacity. But this is a way to really demonstrate interest in an official way, more so than students have ever had before.
The away rotations, thanks for bringing that up. Well, so a student, whether maybe they're at Johns Hopkins and doing a rotation in Columbia, there's a process. It's almost an application process for aways.
It's getting, the hard part for students is this is getting harder, not easier, because each stage of the process is getting more and more competitive because of the nature of what we're talking about. And so there's now what students did, the intended downstream consequence of 30 signals was, as Tab said, an application cap. So just to give you Columbia's example, we were getting 1,200 applications a year for our 6 residency spots. It's untenable. And the students' average number of applications was rising to over 90, 92, 93. Again, crazy, because you might get 10 to 12 interview invitations. So you're applying to literally 70 programs that you really have no chance. So the students got smart and they said, okay, well, we've got an application cap. We don't have a cap on how many away rotations I can do. And those away rotations, just call them an audition month, right? You're auditioning for a job for 1 month with 8 other people sitting next to you and to the right and to the left that want the same job. And I tell students all the time, there's no more awkward situation on the planet than that, right? It's a very bizarre scenario, but it is what it is. And so it used to be that our students would do their 1 home rotation, acting internship or sub-internship, and 2 away rotations. So 15, 20 years ago, that was it. Then all of a sudden there was a tipping point, Malcolm Gladwell tipping point phenomenon, and all of a sudden they were doing 3. It kind of came out of nowhere. And so that became the new norm. And then with signaling, the new norm now is 4 aways.
And these are 1 month?
1 month rotations. And so it becomes increasingly complicated because now you're applying to 4 away rotations, but you have to have some backups because you're not necessarily going to get them all because it's become so competitive. And for example, at Columbia, we have 12 students going into orthopedics next year that are interested for the next cycle coming up. And so those 12 students, I give them a homework assignment. Tabs knows this. I said, okay, guys, get an Excel sheet together. I want a 12 by 6 grid. Give me your top 4 choices for each of you, and then your first and second alternates. And I don't want any more than 4 of you applying to the same away rotations because they're never taking more than 4. They probably won't take more than 3. So that's challenging, but Tabs, through our work, one of the things I'm most proud of is you see around the country, because of the number of webinars we've done, we see students collaborating all across the country, whether they have mentors or not, whether they have people guiding them or not. This part of it has gotten through to the culture that says it doesn't matter how megalomaniac you are and how egocentric you are. If you don't work with your peers from your same school, you may be the one that gets killed by that behavior. So we have seen a remarkable change across the country. It doesn't happen everywhere, but it's happening much more commonly than we've ever seen when we started this whole journey.
And I would echo that, and it's incredible to see the amount of engagement that there is, and even people stopping us, individually, Dr. Levine for sure, me every so often also, and speaking to, hey, the value that it's added. And someone yesterday said, we did exactly what y'all suggested of getting together, working together, figuring out the rotations, figuring out, hey, like how do we minimize overlap while maximizing opportunity? And that is something that has not been really done in this one institution, not done previously, but they have really been thinking about that. And even with our own student at Hopkins this year, this group has really gone after trying to coordinate as best as they can, because they're not operating in a silo. They need to understand that if one person succeeds in this way, they will all succeed. But if they are working individually and not together, then they're more likely to basically box each other out, and inadvertently for that matter. And that would be a huge fallacy on our part, because obviously as people who are well versed on what's going on acutely, you've got to be able to manage that. And so we speak about that. I mean, I speak about that with students. I know Bill does too, routinely about, hey, this is how you have to think about it. Even if you're like, well, so-and-so is going, rotating at this space, I really want to go there. Okay, well, what are the trade-offs? Why do you want to go there? Talk to the other person, we can facilitate, so on and so forth. But ultimately, there are almost 200 programs in the country. Like, there are great places out there, and you can broaden your horizon about what that opportunity represents to you, and say, hey, if I'm overlapping on one, maybe there's another place that is comparable that would meet.
That you encourage students work as a cohort.
Exactly right.
Yeah, it's a little bit like early decision, and I don't like early decision for high school students going to college. They have to put all your eggs in one basket. And we've tried to get across to medical students that so many people focus on the same handful of residency programs, and that's the only place I want to go. And you're like, do you recognize that within New York City, you have 12 different programs. Within Chicago, you have 7. There's so many amazing orthopedic programs. And I think part of the journey is, and when I sit down with the students on day one as we start this planning discussions, is our goal, my goal, should be your goal, which is that we want all of our Columbia medical students to match in orthopedics every year. So, from my standpoint, we sit down and we say, our goals are aligned, hopefully, and we want every Columbia medical student to match. And over the last 28 years, we have a 98% success rate at Columbia. And that has been very purposeful. It hasn't happened by happenstance. It's been very well orchestrated, because we take the students, we make sure that we put them in the old days before signaling. If I knew you were a third student, then we were going to do your rotations at places that didn't know you, the middle third and upper third from Columbia existed. You just looked like an amazing student, but maybe not quite as amazing as the others. And so I think that's the concept, is to try to get across to students that don't worry about the so-called top tier programs. Is your goal to be an orthopedic surgeon? Okay, check, yes. Now let's figure out with your portfolio that you've put together, this is based on your work. Now, what can we do to help mentor you to say, with this type of portfolio, we know you're the type of student that matches a certain type of residency program. So we can now help direct students to those type and broaden their horizons, rather than thinking I have to go to Hopkins, or I have to go to Columbia, I have to go to HSS, whatever they think the top programs are. And I think that process has helped students to start to recognize that their goals are aligned. If their goals are aligned with each other and with us, then hopefully we're going to get those results. 100% matching from our school. That's every year our goal, and we do our best to try to achieve that.
And these are all great points, and I think it's why I've learned so much about this process from Bill also, just as we talk about it on a regular basis. I think getting students to sort of buy into this notion of, hey, there's more to sort of thinking about what program you're best fit at than just like a rank list. And what I mean by that is going on to ranking sites like Doximity, US News and World, all of that. You don't have to just go, hey, I'm going to signal those top 30 programs, because that may not be the right program for you. So this introspective discussion one can have with themselves, but then you can have a faculty member like Bill, like myself, kind of help kind of accompany you on, is to say, hey, what are you really looking for? And maybe it is one of those top 3 programs that you will thrive at, but I'm trying to pick out of the students, I'm trying to tease out for them, asking them like several questions about, hey, where do you see yourself in terms of like your training requirement? It's not so much, and I would say this is also kind of like, an urban legend of, where you train does not necessarily dictate where you will end up in your career. What I will say is about, personally, I will say it's about what you do with that opportunity. So find the place that's going to give you the best opportunity to grow the most and become the best orthopedic surgeon you can be, and all the opportunities will follow suit. And you find places like the Academy or other specialty organization meetings, and there's always something going on. There's always things you can get involved with. You're from a student level all the way up to whether you're a seasoned attending. And I would definitely tell people this: you can be at whatever institution you feel is best for you and still do all the amazing things that folks like yourself and others are doing on a regular basis, which is really critical when you're thinking about this.
Students that are applying, that are maybe looking at their CVs and how they can support their CVs with research productivity, for one. And some students will choose to do a research year, whether at their home institution or often at another institution that's offering it. Do you have thoughts, opinions about students,
Yes.
pros and cons of doing a research year, adding additional year of medical school, essentially?
Well, you have to be careful, because just so the students know, Dr. Paul Tornetta, former Academy president, absolutely hates research years. So that's one person. But his point is that as orthopedic surgeons, we are earmarked to have to learn how to handle lots of different situations. If you don't like the term multitasking, that's okay, but some form of that. And so his perspective is he doesn't think that you should have to take an additional year just to focus on research, and that you should be able to do that within the confines of years 1 and 2 of medical school. That's one person's perspective, and it's out there. But I use that as an example because I think there is this notion that I have to do a research year. The question is, why are you doing a research year? That's the first important question. If it's because of flaws on your portfolio, it then depends, what are those flaws? Because if those flaws are not overcomable, then you have to have an honest conversation, because 25% of medical students don't match every year in orthopedics. One of the reasons that number is so high, in our humble opinion, is because a lot of students who are applying in orthopedic surgery should not be applying in orthopedic surgery. Are there gems that fall through the cracks? We sure know that to be true. That's the minority. The majority of those students who do not match probably should have been told by somebody somewhere sometime not to apply, but they're not. And so if you have a board score, now we only get one because step 1's pass-fail, as Tabs mentioned. If your step 2 score is 208, which used to be perfectly fine in our day, but now is off the charts low, that's probably not overcomable. If you have no honors in a system that has honors, high pass, and let's say you have 8 out of 8 passes in a system that had 3 grades options, and you have 8 passes and a 208, you could do 5 years of research, and your odds of matching in orthopedics are infinitesimally small. Now, let's say you have a 235, you didn't quite get the 240 mark that a lot of us think is just fine. Like 230 to 240 for me is perfectly fine. Some people say it's got to be 240 or above. But let's say you have a 235, you got 2 honors, you have 6 high passes. So you have a perfectly fine overall CV, but you didn't do too much scholarly productivity. You don't have any publications. That's a student where we're probably going to both, without knowing what the other would say, you doing a year of research is going to be really important to you, because you do have a void, which is not having research. You can add that, and now your step 2 score and your 3rd year clerkship grades can be overcome. It's not a guarantee, and we heard this all throughout the medical student forum. There's no guarantee that doing a year of research is going to increase your chances of matching. And furthermore, you've got to be sure that the year of research you select is going to allow you to be productive, because it can hurt you to do a year of research and then have 1 publication at the end of it. And so you do have to be smart, do your due diligence, go to a place that has a track record of success, not only of productivity during the year, but ideally successfully having their research fellows match in orthopedics. That's of course the creme de la creme, if you can find that combination.
I would add that I think what's also important, as someone who did a research year, having not matched, with that void, as it were, and an average to match board score at the time, and pretty solid grades, it's one of the most important tenets of these research years in my mind. It's not even, yes, the productivity is important, but even beyond that is the relationship. Because you are going in there with many times with folks who don't have an established set of connections, right? They haven't connected with their own home department. They haven't connected with others in the field, people who can guide them, build up that mentorship, eventually sponsor them in some capacity, advocate for them. And if this is where that time spent really affords that opportunity to do so. But if you are juxtaposing, hey, the research piece in isolation, then I would humbly say we got to be really careful if that's all that's coming out of it without this sort of other mentorship guidance as well, because I think that's probably equally important, and sometimes, humbly, it may be even more important, because there may be other soft skill sets that need to be discussed and worked through, talked through in the clinical environment and beyond that, hey, someone may be doing, and if they continue doing that, no matter how many publications that they have, that if you didn't have a chance to try to adjust for that or account for that and affect that change or affect change, then that could be challenging when they do go off to their away rotations and so on. Doesn't matter how many they do, that sort of soft skill set can be a problem. So I think that's where there's this other side to it all that is really important that we probably take for granted in some capacity, but we probably need to be a lot more intentional about, especially depending on the person who's doing that year and what are some of the considerations and even why they're doing the year in the first place.
Well, that's great. We've covered a lot of ground. Is there any other areas that you think that bring up at this point that maybe we haven't covered?
I would just say, well, first off, Rich, thanks for having us. It's been wonderful, and I would just say that for students out there who are listening to this in particular, or for faculty who are trying to get involved and support, and even residents who are looking to stay engaged with students and learners down the line, don't hesitate to kind of learn from those around you, because educators abound. People are trying to stay active, whether it be academy, whether it be through AOA or other organizations, but there's a lot of good to do. Students are looking for that support. They're looking for mentorship. They're looking for sponsorship opportunities. But I would tell you that being available is probably one of the most important things. And just always remember that you were in their shoes once upon a time. And as you progress through your career, it's important to look back, to just remember where you came from, because that could be the difference between, hey, whether a student decides to pursue, this great career or not.
My final words of thoughts on this topic, Rich, again, thanks for having us. If you're the student listening to this podcast and you're considering orthopedics, ask yourself one important question. Why do I want to be an orthopedic surgeon? And if you don't have a really visceral, insightful answer to that question, take a step back. One of the things we've seen is the 8-hour work week has changed. Like, there are people applying in orthopedics who never would have done that before. And if you're a mentor, make sure the person you are mentoring actually can answer that question. You'll be shocked at how many times we talk to students, and when you ask them that question, the answer is kind of iffy. And so we developed a couple of questions a couple of years ago, and I sent that around on the AOA Cord blog, and it blew up the entire thing. It went crazy. And it was just simple questions, but like, can you imagine yourself doing anything but orthopedics? Do you love being in the operating room? Do you love the thought of being called to the emergency room at 2 a.m. if there aren't any residents to have to reduce a displaced distal radius fracture? Just a couple of simple questions. Mm-hmm. And when I give those now to my students, mm-hmm. and I've had 3 students in the last 5 years since I started asking them those questions who came back to me and said, Dr. Levine, thanks so much. I don't think orthopedics is actually what I want to do. And it was so great that they learned that before they went through this whole process.
Well, thank you, Bill and Tabs, for this. It's very insightful for not only for our students who are going to be going through the match process, but also our members who want to be the best advisors they can for students. And I think this is very informative for all of us. So there you have it, the AAOS Now podcast with Dr. Bill Levine and Dr. Amiethab Aiyer on the orthopedic residency match process.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the AAOS Now podcast, part of the AAOS Bone Beat Orthopedic podcast channel. Production and editing provided by MK Quinn Media. Don't miss out on future episodes of the AAOS Now podcast. Bookmark our page, aaos.org/AAOS-now-podcast. Listen to new and past episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and the Health Podcast Network, and watch video versions of every episode on the AAOS Now Podcast YouTube channel.